Salam alaikum. It's an honor to be here, and I'm grateful to Her Excellency Mahmoud al-Rumi for inviting me after we met in Boston. I am going to take you from the level of the global and the national, and from the great arc of history into individual lives, because that's what I study. I'm a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst, and I study lifespan development. Now, what we have been hearing about this morning is the tyranny of GDP, the fact that economics do not keep us happy. And in fact, the economists tell us that variation in income across the world accounts for less than 2% of variation in individual happiness. And what the UN has told us, yes, the World Happiness Reports find that there are these other factors that are equally important, if not more important, in what actually makes individual lives happy, what makes people thrive. Social support, the expectancy of having a healthy life and being able to have health care, freedom to make life choices, generosity. Actually, those of us who are more generous are happier. And trust. Trust in each other, trust in our governments. So if all of those are known to make us happy, there's an enormous disconnect between what we know and what particularly young people say they want out of their lives. This is particularly striking in recent years when surveys, at least in the United States, of young adults, we call them millennials, asking them what their most important life goals are. Those surveys reveal that over 80% of our young adults say that their most important goal in life is to get rich. And more than half of those same young adults say that another major life goal is to become famous. Equally, about half say that one of the things that will make them happy in their lives is working harder and harder at work, at achieving more. How does this happen? How is this disconnect perpetuated? The disconnection between what we know actually makes people happy and what young adults tell us they think will make them happy as they go through life. So I would argue that one of the perpetuators of this disconnect is the social media that bombards us every day. That in fact, the media advertising defines what a good life is for us in all these subliminal ways. They don't allow us to define the good life. So what we're talking about here is not what you see on billboards. It's not what you see on your Twitter feeds. Let me just take the example of Facebook. So if a visitor from another planet came to Earth and looked at Facebook as a representation of what human life was like and saw all the pictures that we all put up there, they would believe that we were all always either on vacation or at a party all of the time. And of course, we know rationally that that's not the case, but sitting alone in our homes with our laptops, when we look at Facebook, it's hard not to feel like we're missing out and that everybody else is having a wonderful life all the time. Everybody else is happy 24/7. One of my Zen teachers is fond of saying, we are always comparing our insides to other people's outsides. We're always comparing that messy experience of being human, of being happy, sometimes unhappy, other times confused, with what we all put out there for each other, what we call our game faces. And so we're left with often this sense that we are not living a life that we could live, and we're not living real life. So, how do we learn about what actually makes people happy? Well, most of what we know about human life, we know from asking people to tell us about their pasts. And one of the things we know is that memory is highly unreliable. We forget vast amounts of what happens to us. Think about what you had for dinner 1 week ago today. I bet most of us can't remember. And think about the vast amount of information that comes into us that we forget. Memory is also creative. We are highly suggestible beings, and we shape our memories. In fact, we revise our memories in a more positive direction as we get older. There's a bumper sticker in the United States that I like. It says, "It's never too late to have a happy childhood." And it speaks to the creativity. Mark Twain, the American writer, wrote about this. He said, "Some of the worst things in my life never happened." So, if asking people to remember the past is unreliable, how else might we learn? And this is where my life's work has come in, which is to follow people from the time they're young all the way into old age, to follow their lives before we know how their individual stories will come out, to see what really keeps people happy and healthy. I'm the fourth director of what we think is the longest study of adult life that's ever been done. The Harvard Study of Adult Development began studying 724 men. All men, unfortunately, because at that time, if you wanted to study normal development, you studied all men, but now we're studying women as well. But at that time, we studied two groups of men. A group of Harvard University students, all at the age of 19, who entered the study, and a group of boys from Boston's poorest families, boys from some of the most disadvantaged and troubled families in the United States in the 1930s. And when they entered the study as teenagers, we gave them elaborate interviews, we did medical exams, we went to their homes and spoke with their parents. And then all of those boys grew up, and we continued to follow them against all odds, because most longitudinal studies end after just a few years because so many people drop out. But we followed these men into midlife. They entered all walks of life, becoming factory workers, bricklayers, doctors, lawyers. One president of the United States was part of the study, John Kennedy. Famous newspaper editors. Some people developed schizophrenia. Some people became alcoholics. Some people were at the top of the social ladder when they started the study and fell all the way to the bottom, and some people made the journey in the other direction. And then we kept following those people all the way into old age. In fact, about 20 of our original Harvard young men are now average age 96, and they are still alive. And about 60 of our inner city men are still alive, average age 90. So what did we study? We studied the big domains of human life: mental health, physical health. The Harvard men all served in World War II, and so we studied their World War II experiences. The inner city men were younger, and so did not go to the war. We studied their work lives, their relationships. As they got older, we studied aging and retirement, and even how they felt about facing death. How did we do this? Well, we asked them in questionnaires year after year to tell us about their lives, but we also got their medical records from their doctors. We drew their blood for DNA. We scanned their brains. We talked to their wives. We talked to their children. We even videotaped them talking to their wives about their deepest concerns. So what did we learn? Well, we learned a great many things about what makes people happy and keeps them happy over their lives, and what keeps them healthy. None of it was about wealth. None of it was about fame. None of it turned out to be about how much people achieved in their work lives. The biggest lesson that we learned was that close relationships were the strongest predictor of what would keep people happy and healthy throughout their lives. Now, in some ways, the idea that relationships would keep us happy was not a surprise. What was a surprise, and we didn't believe at first in our study findings, was that close relationships actually predicted people's health. In fact, it was seemed like such an aberrant result that we kept ignoring it, and then other research groups found the same thing. How could our relationships actually keep us healthier? What we found was the people who saw more people in their lives each week, the people who had more connections in the world, stayed healthier through middle age, when some people were developing arthritis and heart disease and diabetes. The people with the happiest relationships were less likely to develop those physical illnesses. In addition, the people with the happiest relationships were less likely to experience early cognitive decline as they got older. It wasn't just the number of social connections that kept people happy, it was very much the quality of their connections. So it turns out that people who were involved in terrible, acrimonious relationships all day long, those people had health that declined as soon or sooner than people without relationships. But people with warm, close connections, those were the people who stayed healthier. So, for example, once we had followed our men all the way out to age 80, we wanted to see if we could predict who's going to be a happy, healthy octogenarian and who is not. So we looked back at age 50 and everything we knew about these men in midlife. And what turned out to predict who was going to grow old, well, was not their cholesterol levels at age 50. It wasn't anything about their medical records. It was how satisfied they were with their relationships. The people who were the most satisfied were the people who were the healthiest and happiest 30 years later. We also found that people who were most secure in late life marriages turned out to have slower cognitive decline as they got very old, compared with people who were insecure or felt they didn't have people they could rely on. One of the things we've learned, and other research groups have learned, is that loneliness turns out to be toxic, not just for happiness, but for our physical health. That in fact, loneliness is a subjective experience. It's that experience of feeling less connected to others than we want to be. So as we know, you can be lonely in a crowd, you can be lonely in a big family, you can be lonely in a marriage. And we found that lonely people have earlier health decline in midlife, have earlier cognitive decline, and they die sooner than people who are not lonely. And in the United States, when they do surveys and they ask people whether they're lonely, more than 1 in 5 Americans reports feeling lonely. One of the things we've learned following lives over many, many years is that our adult relationships are not static. So for example, with marital satisfaction, we learned that marital satisfaction is the highest when we first get together with our partners, no surprise. But then actually it goes down typically when the first child is born, which is understandable as the couple focuses on children. And then it goes back up again when children leave home. This is at least in the United States, where the culture is that children often do leave home after their secondary school education. And in the United States, marital satisfaction only goes down again if the children come back to live at home. Now, one of the things that we have found is that relationships don't have to be smooth. In fact, relationships are almost never always smooth. There are always disagreements, conflicts. That's not the problem. And that what we find is that people who, sorry, I just lost my slide. That people who argue in couples do not have an earlier decline in health as long as they really believe that the person they're partnered with is someone they can count on when times are hard. So that's just a reminder that relationships don't have to be happy 24/7, just as we as individuals don't have to be happy 24/7 to confer those benefits that I'm talking about. So, other things we learn about the science of happiness. We are bombarded every day by messages that tell us that what we really need to be happy is to consume more, to buy things, that if we buy a particular car, women will be attracted to us, that if we all use a particular face cream, we'll never grow old, and we'll all be beautiful. These are messages wherever we look, on billboards, on social media, on television. But actually, good research tells us that the best things in life are not things. They tell us that, in fact, experiences make us happier than material goods. So, for example, when they study people who have bought material things, luxury items, and people who have had experiences like going to a museum, going out with friends, paying for vacations, they find that, in fact, the experiences make people happier longer than the material goods that they buy. Now, why is, and this is across all cultures, it's men and women, it's all levels of income. Why is this the case? Well, experiences change us. They become part of us, and in a way, they become ours. Material goods simply become part of the new normal. So, for example, if I buy a big screen TV, initially I'm excited, I bring it home, I hook it up, it's beautiful, and then it becomes just the thing I watch TV on. I'm also more likely to compare my big screen TV with my neighbor's if I go over to his house and realize that he's got a bigger TV. And what we know also from this developmental science is that people who compare themselves to others more are less happy than people who do not compare themselves as often. What that means is that we are more likely to compare our material goods to others than to compare our experiences. My trip to Dubai, it may be similar to someone else's trip, but it's my trip. And I will think about it and I will enjoy it for weeks, months, years to come. Another thing that experiences do that material goods do not do is they connect us more to other people. And developmental science has shown this. All of which is to say that experiences with other people are these sources of happiness and well-being that are demonstrated over and over, not just in our study, but in other studies as well. Now, given that, there are these alarming trends, certainly in Western industrialized societies, and unfortunately in developing countries as well. This is the title of a book, Bowling Alone, and it's by a sociologist named Robert Putnam, who studied the decline in what he calls social capital in the United States. He studied this and wrote this book in the 1980s, and what he found was in the prior 25 years, people's investment in their social lives plunged dramatically. People stopped going out, they stopped seeing friends, they stopped joining clubs, they stopped volunteering. And that decline in social capital coincided exactly with the introduction of television into the American home. And that has been replicated across developing societies all over the world. So Robert Putnam went back 25 years later and said, how are we doing? And in fact, what he found is that in the last 25 years, joining clubs, joining civic organizations has gone down yet again by 50%. That in fact, having family dinners and family vacations has also declined dramatically. We know that families who regularly eat together have children who are more successful in school, they're in trouble with the law at much lower rates, they get in trouble with drugs much less often. So we know that family dinners and this kind of family cohesion works, and it is continuing to decline. In 1983, when Robert Putnam asked people, do you have anyone in the world that you can confide in, that you can tell your most important secrets to? 12% said that they didn't. 25 years later, 1 in 4 people said there was no one in the world that they could talk to about the things that were most important to them. What's responsible for this later decline? Well, it's almost certainly these wonderful devices that we all love, that some of you are on right now. These wonderful devices that make us smarter than we ever have been before, but that hijack our attention. Think about how hard it is to give your full attention to anything these days. And if you think about it, giving our full attention to another human being may be the greatest gift that we have to offer. Our closest relationships are often the last ones to demand our full attention. So you see these pictures of people, families on the phone, on their smartphones, looking at their computers. Families, pictures of families at beautiful vacation spots where everybody's looking down on their smartphone. And what we are modeling for our children is something we don't even understand yet. One of my colleagues is a public relations guy, and he's on calls all the time. And he told me that he went to call his 4-year-old daughter for dinner recently, and she was sitting in her room playing with a fake toy cell phone. And she saw him and she put her hand out and said, "Daddy, wait a minute, I'm on a call." And he said his heart sank. So how these devices are shaping us is something that we need to understand much more about. So what's some of the preventive medicine that may help us really pay relationships the attention that they deserve? Well, there's some pretty easy and powerful steps. One is not necessarily drinking wine, but making time to do new activities with people who you take for granted. Could be your spouse, could be your old friends, but to try new things and to make time where you are giving each other your undivided attention. Family dinners, family gatherings, again, paying more attention in those cultures where family cohesion is getting fragmented, making sure that families sit down and have meals together and talk to each other. And finally, volunteering in our communities, really investing time in meeting with other people, particularly around causes that we care about. Now, in my work, since most of our first generation has passed away, we are studying the second generation, over 2,000 of the children of these men. Fortunately now, half women, half men. We're studying them to look at their childhoods and their experiences of stress or connection and how they're playing out in their middle-aged lives. Most of these people are in their 50s and 60s. And so we're trying to find answers to how our relationships and stressful relationships get into our bodies and take their toll so that we can learn about prevention. So the take-home messages of my talk are pretty simple. It's that science tells us that human connection is vitally important for happiness and health. That technology has the power to isolate us from each other, but it also has the power to connect us. And that what we need to do is pay much more careful attention to how we're using technology so that technology doesn't use and misuse us. And finally, that it is possible to actually structure our lives to pay more attention to how we're investing in our relationships as a form of self-care. So I'm going to close with two quotes, one from the 19th century philosopher, Henry David Thoreau, who was looking around, he was looking at men and women, but his middle-aged, middle-income New England dwellers. And he wrote that the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. Quiet desperation. So much suffering in the midst of plenty. So I want to counter that with the philosophy of the writer and activist Maya Angelou, who writes, "My mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive, and to do so with some passion, some compassion, some humor, and some style." And seeing this aspiration raised to the national level and the global level excites me and sends me back to my research lab with renewed energy. So thank you all for this conference.